Thank you, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, if it's too loud or too soft, just let me know. So I hate standing behind a lectern, but I don't have an automatic clicker. I will do my best with my reach. So this is an informational exchange. I'd like to kind of couch it as such. So I'd like you to ask questions. If you have a question, interrupt me. I'm just a regular guy. So thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a beautiful school, and I was excited to come visit my old friend Ramesh. Ramesh is a great guy, lucky to have him. And we miss him, but we keep in touch, so he's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk about this subject, eye safety in dentistry and associated liability. When you hear something like that, as dentists, the hair on the back of our neck, when you hear the liability word, stands up just because liability means lawyers, and that can be sort of, I don't know, daunting, scary. So today I'm going to put on your laps a problem, but with the problem, I'm going to give you a solution, and I'm sharing this information in a collegial manner, and going to share with you what we've done at Tufts and what we've done at Tufts to solve this problem. So I'm going to give you everything. This presentation, although it's recorded, I'm going to give it to Ramesh, and I'm going to also give you our infection control manual and make that available through Ramesh. So here to share. My colleague, Dr. Ahmad Taibbi, could not be here, but he is a good friend, colleague, mentor. He's a professor of plastics engineering at UMass. Probably the most brilliant man I've ever met in my life, and if I could be a fraction of who he is, I'd be delighted. He's, after being an engineer, he's an attorney who teaches business law, practices business law, and patent law, and quite a gentleman, quite a remarkable guy. He actually had a business where he developed the first ever NIOSH approved respirator mask in the US. Quite a guy. So he kind of put together the legal portion of this, so I'm going to do my best to shadow what he may have said. So I'll advance through these slides. As two engineers, Dr. Taibbi and I, we saw a problem, and our research led to a solution, but as engineers do, when they see a problem, we developed a patented product. So that protects or addresses the issue that I'm going to speak to you about. So I wanted to, in full transparency, disclose that we patented a product together and co-invented. And I'm not here as a sales call. I'm here to show you a situation and share our research with you. That's my disclosure. So I know time is limited. Let's kind of get to it, and I'll be watching the clock. Again, ask questions along the way. So some of the mechanics, if you will, using high-speed hand pieces. We looked at the source of projectiles and eye injuries, okay? High-speed hand pieces can revolve up to 400,000 revolutions per minute. And if one was to do the calculations, debris can spin off of a high-speed handpiece of up to 50 miles per hour. And in dentistry, you're essentially in a 12 o'clock position and the patient's in a 6 o'clock position. And that's something we really looked at, and I'm going to share a story personally and how I got interested in this journey, and I want to take you on this journey with me. Some of the things that can infect or hurt you are, as we know, bloodborne pathogens, calculus, broken restorations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that we looked at was kind of from an engineering model and possible entry routes that debris may take towards a practitioner's eye. And we kind of looked at it by putting together a model. The operator with the mask, if you will, is depicted, and the patient. And we took careful measurements, averages, and we developed sort of these spatial relationships. The spatial relationship or distances were much derived at these days we're using loops, and average focal distances for loops are about 18 to 20 inches. So roughly in that neighborhood, we created this model, if you will. In particular, we studied the common mask and glasses combination, okay? Many people these days are wearing loops. I've seen people wearing reading glasses, prescription glasses. There's a whole array of glasses that people wear. But the combination of glasses and mask is something that we wanted to study. So trying to move quickly because I do want to leave time for you to get back to clinic. We broke it down into elements, if you will. And the three elements that we looked at were, one, frontal trajectory roots, side trajectory roots, and what we call bottom gap. So when wearing glasses, your glasses will protect you against perpendicular projectiles, if you will. And side shields will protect you against anything coming in from the side. And if you were to kind of look at the OSHA law, and we're going to break into that a little bit more, OSHA says that an employer must provide appropriate eye protection, okay? So when you look at the bottom gap protection, there's no real OSHA law or definition that says bottom gaps must be protected until recently. And that's what we're going to kind of get at today. Sounds a little confusing at this point, but think of those three elements. Bottom gaps, as defined, are the space between the lower rim of one's eyewear and the top edge of the mask. And when you think about that spatial relationship in dentistry, that 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock position, and the projectiles that could come off of a high-speed handpiece or a low-speed handpiece, things can shoot up into your eyes and get in through the bottom gap. Why am I so interested in this, and how did I get interested in this? Well, it was back in 2005. I was in my private practice, and I was removing an old amalgam, and I was wearing a mask and glasses. And all of a sudden, something shot me in the eye. It was a chunk of amalgam, and it actually embedded into the white part of my eye. I have a piece of it still there. We can do some show and tell after. And, but I ended up in the emergency room. It was fished out. I had a patch on my eye and antibiotics for about a week or so, and it was, you know, I forgot it quickly, to be truthful with you. I really did. And this was in 2005, and, you know, back to work, back to practice. And it was probably about a couple of months later when all of a sudden, it was a filling I did a few days before. It was a little high. It was an amalgam on number 14. And I was using a diamond football, I'll never forget it, to adjust the occlusion. And all of a sudden, I was doing that, adjusting, and I felt debris shooting up into my eye. So I just intuitively kind of moved away and was drilling like that. And I started to think, what's going on here? This is an early point in my career. I can't continue like this. So I started thinking about it, talking to colleagues. And an interesting statistic is 70% of all dental practitioners receive some degree of ocular trauma in their career. Being at a dental school, you know, I was able to observe students and talk to students and talk to people. And really, I found out a lot of things. There was one particular student who, he was a third year, new to the clinic. I don't want to read this word for word, but I'll summarize it. He was newly married, and he was working in a procedure. The patient was HIV positive, and all of a sudden, something shot into that bottom gap, hit him in the eye, and these are his words, unsolicited. And he went through the protocol, and being newly married, his wife wanted him to actually drop out of dental school and change careers because she was terrified. And being newly married, she just wanted to keep away until he was clear, no matter what. She was terrified She didn't understand the science that we know. All in all, he missed some exams, he was nervous, a lot of things changed in his life, but he was okay at the end. But it could have been life-changing if he was infected. It could have been life-changing if he lost his vision or got injured. And so it really started to make me think and realize that, hey, as an educator, as a healthcare provider, maybe this is something that needs attention. And so I went back to Dr. Taibbi, my colleague, mentor, and friend, and we started talking as engineers would. And we used to meet on Fridays, have lunch, and we started talking about this. And we decided to do some research, and we broke it down kind of with his legal perspective and did a really interesting study on bottom gaps. And we identified that as a problem. We wanted to research bottom gaps, and that's kind of what we did. So we kind of started looking into the OSHA portion of it. And what does the law say? Interestingly, we were talking about this earlier this morning. Do you know OSHA doesn't regulate patients' need to wear eye protection? That's not an OSHA law. OSHA is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And they focus on employer-employee relations, but nothing and no law says that a patient must wear safety glasses. In my practice, it's a must. At most dental schools, at Tufts, it's a must. We won't even see a patient if they don't have protective eyewear. And I'm sure it is here too. So I was talking to Brandon earlier, and we were both at the Atlanta OSAT meeting, and the keynote speaker was this woman, Jen. She was a patient in an endodontist office, and the practitioner dropped a used needle from her mouth, hit her eye. It didn't hurt her because the eye doesn't have feelings. They just rinsed it. And she said, keep going with the procedure. Everything will be fine. Well, she got an infection. She lost her eye. She has a glass eye. And she was the keynote speaker at that meeting. So I would just recommend, as a colleague, make sure patients always have protective eyewear. But OSHA looks at the employer-employee, and that is something that's called administrative law. That's how OSHA looks at it. If you look at the actual OSHA law, eye and face protection, there's a few elements, this slide and the next slide, but I highlighted in purple kind of what's in our world, if you will, in dentistry. The way OSHA did it at first, I underlined the word appropriate. That word was not there some time ago. So as these laws evolve, they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's very wordy, which I will not read, but it's here for your reference. The second slide shows the rest of this OSHA law. But going back to this previous slide, somebody realized that, hey, there has to be a law saying you need eye and face protection. So that's where number one came. Then somebody got injured through the side, not necessarily doing dentistry, but this is just occupational. And somebody said, okay, put on side shields as part 2. And then injurious light. Somebody got injured from UV light or something. Now it's 3. What OSHA did, and in consultation with OSHA, and they defined this and cleared this up for us, they changed that one word, appropriate. Appropriate is a very big word, and it basically covers, as technology changes, as improvements occur, the word appropriate, evidence-based, is now covered. So you could actually get rid of all the other paragraphs and just have one paragraph that says, the employer shall ensure that each affected employee uses appropriate eye or face protection. That would say it all in a legal world. And again, that's more of the OSHA law for your reference if you want to get into the breakdown of it. So what Dr. Taibbi and I decided to do was model the practitioner-patient relationship and do what we were spray studies. So what we did was we took an average size Los Alamos head, and the Los Alamos head was derived from the US Air Force, where they took an average size biometric dimensional head, if you will, and those are the folks who fit the oxygen masks for fighter pilots. And so we used that actual size head, and that's a model head from there, to give us averages. Of course, we didn't test our animals or on humans. We built an apparatus to show the spatial relationship in our spray studies of the provider and the patient. That, I wish I had a laser pointer, but I don't. That cross member where you see the markings, if you will, the center line and those two hash marks, are where we directed spray towards the face of the so-called practitioner. You can see the side shot showing the angle. This next slide showing that measurement, that was derived at focal distances averages from loops. We consulted with all the loop companies, and they said an average of 18 to 20 would give you a pretty good guesstimate of where a practitioner may be in the process of practicing wearing loops. So what we did was, in these spray studies, we used a water-based soluble spray, not to look at spray or spatter, but to mimic trajectories that would maybe simulate where projectiles could travel while doing dentistry or practicing dentistry. So those angles came from the left and right and center. We delivered 2 spray shots, and again, previous slide, you can see in the hand of that researcher that's a spray bottle that has the liquid media. So those 3 arrows, there were 2 spray shots delivered at the face of the practitioner with this red dye, and we wanted to offer repeatability and be able to do this across the board. So that was the jig, if you will, that we set up. The first thing we looked at in our study was the common mask and glasses that I was wearing, in which I couldn't understand why I was getting injured. So a properly worn mask is crimped around the nose, under the chin, and the glasses shown were very top-level safety glasses that I was using at the time. And we delivered 3 spray shots from that same distance, from those angles. And what we saw was this. You can see the mask, okay, covered the nose and mouth. The glasses covered the eyes. When you break down those elements, you have a mask which is just designed to cover the nose and the mouth. The glasses cover the eyes against perpendicular, and the side shields against side sort of projectiles. But in dentistry, really nothing ever comes in from the side unless there's ever a drive-by shooting or something crazy. So when you peel off the elements, you can see the top edge of the mask was heavily sprayed. The forehead got hit, the bridge of the nose, and the eye got hit. Okay? If anything hit you in the forehead or the bridge of the nose, and with regards to projectiles, would probably be okay. Okay, nothing would, cause blindness or anything. When we look at the eyes, you can see the line of the mask, how that protected. But through the bottom gap is what we learned, is how things can travel and may travel to the eyes. And again, 70% of all practitioners receive some degree of ocular trauma. Even if that's a spray or anything, that's considered trauma. I remember once I went to the eye doctor, and you know how they bring your glasses back for a prescription check? He came out and he said, Pete, what do you do for work? I said, why do you ask that? He goes, because it looks like you work like in some kind of like a coal mine. He said, your glasses, when I magnify them, are all pitted. And I said, I'm a dentist. And that was all the probably deflections of whatever hitting my glasses and pitting them. They were plastic lenses, and they were, I guess, pitted. But my glasses did the job of perpendicular protection. And once in a while, I got that effect when I was adjusting the occlusion with the football burr. It almost felt like I was standing behind an automobile and the tires were spinning in the sand and I was getting dirt kicked up into my face. That's the only thing I can equate that to. So the bottom gap thing really started to make us think. And we did a lot of evidence-based research, and we published. It's been in several magazines and whatnot. And again, looking at that bottom gap, I can't point without the laser, but you can see on the right slide, under the rim and above the mask, there's an entry point or a place we call a breach where debris may enter the eyes, okay? The next thing was we looked at full face shield mask, okay? And to sort of peel back our studies, we didn't put the protective eyewear under the full face shield because you're not supposed to wear just a full face shield alone. You're supposed to wear ANSI compliant safety glasses. The full face shield alone does not offer impact resistance. So we mounted the mannequin head just as we did the mask and glasses, and we did a study of sprays. This is the ANSI standard if you wanted to look at it. ANSI is the American National Standards Institute, and they do all the testing for impact resistance, and this is not only for dentistry, but all of industry. So that's a reference for you. I won't read it. So at the end of our spray studies for that, boom, big shots, and that is to simulate those 3 angles of all debris that could hit the face. When you peel back the mask, it did a great job, and the mannequin, our friend, was protected. His name is Ralph, by the way. That's what we fondly called him. Hope there's nobody here by the name of Ralph. So anyway, now this is where I got to get into the legal part of it and talk to you as the attorneys do. And I'm not an attorney, but I'll do my best. But before I do that, I'd like to show you, as attorneys do and lawyers do, a case study. So we need a little IT help here. I'm into woodworking. It's kind of like my hobby. I don't know if any of you do woodworking, but a good friend of mine, I graduated with him. He's a dentist in Georgia, and one day he called me. He said, "Pete, I just cut my thumb off," and he wasn't kidding, on my table saw. And I said, "Terry, you got to be kidding. What were you doing?" And he told me, that day I went out, I gave my table saw away, and I bought this saw. It's called a SawStop. It's an expensive technology, and I am a proud owner of it, but I'd like to show you this video, what it is. But the case study I want to talk about real briefly is kind of parallels to what we're doing with eye protection. So this guy, he's a physicist. He developed this technology called SawStop. And what it is, it's a saw, a power table saw, and if a human finger touches it, in 5 times faster than what an airbag goes off, the blade will jam and retract, and it will only nick the skin of your finger, and it's going to be demonstrated with that hot dog. It's going to blow your mind. So I bought this technology, but the story is, in the quick case study, this physicist was trying to sell, he was trying to make a profit, he was trying to run a business. He went to a company called Ryobi. They make tools. And Ryobi said, "No, we're not going to take this." He gave him a great presentation. "This is not going to work for us, blah, 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 blah." So now Ryobi knows of this technology. They know of this new standard. And the standard has now been elevated in the eyes of the law because they're aware of it. And all of a sudden, this guy who bought a Ryobi table saw from Home Depot was in his garage doing some stuff, and he cut 2 fingers off. And he sued Ryobi. The attorney was aware, after digging, that Ryobi knew of the appropriate technology change, and the guy settled for millions. And it's kind of almost like this. When automobiles were first invented, Ford Motor Company, GM, none of them had seat belts. Then Ford Motor Company said, "Hey, there's this thing called seat belts. If we put them in, it's going to save people's lives." So GM didn't do it, but when people were getting killed in GM cars, lawsuits were coming. Now it's a standard. All cars need seat belts. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It was very stimulating. So now I'm going to get into the boring part. You should all be excited now. And I'm going to break it down into the legal portions. So OSHA standard 1910.133 eye and face protection says the employer shall ensure appropriate eye or face protection. The big word is appropriate. And as research evolves and things improve, it's covered under the umbrella of appropriate, okay? In a legal world, that means, and they use a term, burden of compliance, that's placed on the employer. So we, as employers in a dental school, are burdened to protect our faculty and our students. And that's called they call it a compliance burden, because you have to comply with the appropriate behavior. The next legal term in negligence theory is called duty of care. And duty of care is an obligation that's imposed on an individual or an entity, okay? And it requires you to adhere to a standard of reasonable care. Some of these slides, I will need to read almost some of the words directly because they're so precise and particular in the legal world. But burden of compliance and duty of care are the two components that are evaluated in what they call a negligence theory case or a liability case, okay? So in this duty of care, in an employment relationship, employer-employee relationship, if the employer knows of, like in the SawStop case, that, hey, you know, this technology is out there, but we're not going to deal with it. We're not going to protect your fingers. Or bottom gaps, you know about bottom gaps because there's evidence-based, peer-reviewed research out there, but you don't want to protect your students, and if one of your students gets injured or a faculty, it's out there and they can come after us. So I'm here to basically give you a problem, and right now people hate me, but I'm honestly here as a colleague to give you a solution. And so the problem is the combination of mask and glasses, as you see in that picture, is not in compliance with the OSHA standard because it is not appropriate. And the reason is the combination would not prevent, and these are legal words put together by attorneys, reasonably foreseeable debris from reaching the practitioner's eyes through the bottom gaps. Bottom gaps are now defined. That's the big word. So note that the combination of the mask and the glasses together are what the problem is. A mask alone protects your nose, as you can see or saw, and your mouth, and the glasses protect you against directions from perpendicular and side. But interestingly, when you wear a mask and you crimp it down over your nose so you won't fog, it creates a bottom gap, okay? And so that combination results in a dangerous combination, and that's what an attorney would look at that as. The solution, and what we've done at Tufts, okay? This is from our infection control manual. The language is put together by attorneys, and the picture in the background is a picture that we use very clearly in that sort of space under the first paragraph. So we show what a bottom gap is, okay? And we define what a bottom gap is, and then we make a recommendation, and the recommendation is to close bottom gaps. And we keep product out there, and this is the simple solution. Even if you have one box of masks with full facials, which I know you have in your clinic, and you just make the statement that bottom gaps are a problem and they should be protected, and here's what a bottom gap is. You've taught the employer, you've counseled them, you've given them solutions. If an employer does not want to wear any bottom gap protection, you're clean in terms of a liability, because you've done everything you can do, okay? I'm not going to read these paragraphs because it'll bore you, but it's here and for your reference, okay? But it's very good stuff to read, the last two paragraphs. Now let me read this second to last paragraph. A dental mask in and of itself serves as intended function of protecting the areas of the wearer's face it covers. Similarly, a protective eyewear worn by a dental practitioner serves the function of preventing particles traveling in a direction perpendicular to the wearer's face from reaching the wearer's eyes. In order to comply with OSHA requirements, it's essential that we use ANSI compliant protective eyewear, side shields, and closed bottom gaps. So closing bottom gaps may be achieved by the use of, again, full face shield, visors, and there's other products out there that will do so. If you make those statements, you show what the bottom gap is, and a picture of it, you're clean, okay? So the summary, and this is a very good legal slide and one you'd want to read word for word. The first paragraph talks about, it's the first line taken from the OSHA standard, the employer shall ensure that affected employees use appropriate eye protection. Then it breaks it down in legal terms. It talks about the burden of providing appropriate eye protection that's placed on the employer. And then it goes on to talk about the combination of protective eyewear and glasses is not a safe combination, and it's dangerous combination. And then it talks about if you know of this and you don't do anything about it, behavior to not act is called, in legal terms, reckless. Those are the words that attorneys would use. If it's intentional or knowingly, they call that reckless behavior. And then those are the elements that would ensue a liability or negligence case. So that's heavy from the lawyers, and that's kind of what we looked at. So our research centered around why is this happening? Why do 70% of practitioners get injured to some degree? And we addressed it, and our hope and goal was to maybe protect one person's vision. The simple rule is close the gap. You've been to the UK, we stole this. And so we've actually going to put up some placards that say close the gap at our school. No, you got to get back. So conclusion, the major inadequacy and breach of the present day mask and regular ordinary eye combination are a problem. And closing bottom gaps is essential. And it's mandated when OSHA uses the word appropriate to define eye safety standards. Where have we gone with this? As Ramesh said earlier, we've given the research data and made a presentation to US Senate and Congress. It's now a standards committee at the ADA. Dr. Shannon Mills did research years ago at the Air Force on this subject matter and recognized our research and formed a standards working group to look at eye safety in dentistry, in particular bottom gaps. And then we've made a presentation to CODA, and it's actually in their notes. We were contacted probably about a year and a half ago by CDC. They became aware of our findings. And so CDC, NIOSH, and the National Personal Protective Testing Laboratories became aware. They're one body. And as we speak, they're redoing our spray studies. And they've actually, Dr. James Harris, who's the head of this program, assigned a PhD doctoral employee. This is his thesis topic, his doctoral thesis, and he's doing these spray studies to look at projectiles and how they may enter the eye. They're almost done with the research, and they will be done by December. And so after the new year, they're planning on, whenever they make a finding, they have to make a statement. So based on their findings, they're going to make a statement, and I'm curious to see if it validates our research. So we're kind of watching what they do, and they've set up an apparatus that's much more precision than we did. They have the spatial relationships. Interestingly, they came up with the same dimensions and the same spray angles. The only thing they're doing differently, we used a manual spray bottle. They have an actuated spray mechanism that gives the same volume, guaranteed, and the same pressure, guaranteed. And so I'm really curious to see what they're going to do. But they're kind of keeping us up to date, and in the near future, they'll probably be making a statement. So Michigan will be ahead of the game, because this lecture has only been given to a few dental schools: Maine, Harvard, Tufts, BU, and NYU. So you guys are going to have the tools, and it's very simple. You don't have to do anything different except put a statement in your infection control manual. Dr. Nalia has all the verbiage and I will, again, give him everything, the updated presentation. I'd really like you to see that SawStop video. It's kind of impressive, and it just sort of makes you understand the whole, how lawyers think. And I learned that in law school, they now are offering a course to lawyers about dental liability. It's really sickening. So, any questions? Yes, yes, no, no questions? Okay. Yes, Brandon.
Quick question. So the procedure that you simulated, what was that procedure? Are we saying that that's the type of spray that will always come with every patient, or is it with specific procedures, or what was it simulating, I guess?
Good question. What we simulated or tried to in the spray studies, we wanted to basically evaluate pathways that projectiles could travel towards the practitioner's face. And there was no real way of marking it if we used sand or little rocks or anything. So we had to use a dye, a spray dye. And we could just see how things flow. And it's just a trajectory review. And our conclusions were, when we broke it down into the elements, again, we realized that glasses just do perpendicular and side shields from the side. The mask gets the nose and the mouth, but the bottom gap is a breach of space. And that was the sort of aha moment where we realized there's a breach, there's a problem. And that's why 70%, and we learned this statistic prior to this, 70% of all practitioners receive some degree of ocular trauma, even if it's something getting in your eye and you got to move away, you know, so.
Any other questions? One thing I failed to mention.
Yes, sir. Question, Bob.
Is it proprietary information, or you're coming up with a solution?
No. The solution is meaning protect bottom gaps, and
Okay.
and whatever means.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the language in one of the slides says whatever means you find to protect bottom gaps is appropriate.
Okay, thank
If you want to use duct tape on glasses,
you. Okay, thank you.
that's a solution.
Okay, thank you.
But you know what's interesting is whenever you see a problem, put on your engineering hats and find a solution. Maybe you'll find a better way to protect the bottom gap. Don't live with problems. That's what I tell the students. Sure. We have full face shield masks available. We have visors, which can be sprayed and reused. But earlier on, I did say that, and this is not my reason for being here, but as two curious engineers who looked into this, we developed a product. And this is not to be a conflict of interest. We found that I started using the full face shield mask routinely. And I didn't like it because I found it was, with loupes, getting glare, fogging, optical distortions, etc. So we set out to find, and they were expensive. They're like $1.80 each they were costing me. I set out to find a cheaper alternative with this group. And I was one of the team who designed or helped contribute to the dental design. But what it is, it's a regular flat mask and has a little opaque butterfly wing that comes off of it perpendicular to it. And it doesn't interfere with your line of vision, and it just seals the bottom gap. It costs pennies in comparison, and you don't even know you're wearing anything. And it meets the OSHA requirement. I've brought that into my practice, and our hygiene team is using it, and they've commented by saying that, you know, they don't even know they're wearing anything and they feel protected. But again, it's treading on, you know, not coming to a university to talk about a product. That's really a conflict, and I need to say that right out loud. That's not why we're here. It's collegial to show a problem, offer a solution. But, you know, there are great products out there that do the job. A lot of people prefer visors. My assistant likes a visor. She wears safety glasses, a visor, and that same mask. It's a little over the top, but that's what she wants. The visors are nice because you can spray it down and reuse it again. And every so often she puts on a new, it's a thicker visor. But the feedback we've gotten with loupes these days, you get a lot of glare. and full face shields, masks, you get the glare and the condensation and the optical distortion.
Any other questions? So folks, I'll ask you please to sign in for the C credit. That's also a way for us to contact you with the